Hello everyone. Today's topic is to go through the Android Stagefright exploit. Before we begin, this was actually a groundbreaking exploit that happened and got extremely publicized. It basically brought Android's, security challenges up to the front and center of the security community as well as the public domain. So let's begin. So Android inherently has had, from the start, several challenges when it comes to, Android security posture. Um, a major factor of these challenges actually is Android's fragmentation. So because Android is open source and Google intends to have multiple, vendors, which includes handset manufacturers, to produce Android devices, naturally it leaves the room open for widespread fragmentation. This is in stark contrast to the Apple iPhone devices, in which Apple contains primarily most of the hardware as well as the software, giving them extreme control as well as, allowing them to make sure that their updates are released on a timely basis and that their updates are managed, efficiently and effectively. So just to put that in perspective, as you can see as an example here, for example, Android, it shows that 10.6% of Android users have upgraded to Android 7.0 compared to, for example, Apple claiming that 86% of its users, are running the latest iOS version as of July 5th, 2017 in this particular example. So of course you also see at the bottom the different Android versions as well, which you have there. So Android security vulnerability rating. So as you can see here, Google basically has a criteria for defining critical versus high severities for different issues when it comes to security of their devices. The particular Android Stagefright Explorer we're talking about today, this is rated as a critical severity, primarily because it allows you to do, remote code execution, which means that you do not need access to a particular user's device. In this particular example, you'll, for example, need their phone number, and you can send them a particular exploit just directly through that, which we'll talk more about. Also, this exploit was, made public at Black Hat by Joshua Drake. Hence, as you can imagine, the exposure that it got. So stage fright, basically, in a nutshell, if you can see on the left bottom, there's a diagram explaining Android's architecture. So the media server, basically, which is extremely or highly privileged, it runs, right above the kernel when it comes to Android, so it's much more privileged than your normal user apps. And on the right side, you can see the permissions that it has, which in most, from a perspective of impact, you can say it has significant high impact because it has almost unlimited access. As you can see on the bottom right, it has all those different groups that it has access to, including the camera, audio, as well as several network services as well. So libstagefright is actually a software library written in C++ that's inside the Android operating system, and this is the one that had majority of the CVE related exploits that we see here. There's multiple CVEs. Most of these were integer overflows, of course, improper bounds checking, but this basically led to what is known as stage fright today, and this affected 90+% of Android devices at the time. As you can see here, part of what this makes it extremely dangerous and critical is that this exploit can be delivered via multiple methods. So in this particular example, we have MMS, which is a multimedia messaging, a web browser, email, social networking such as WhatsApp, Facebook, and for example, even an SD card. MMS is the easiest way to deliver the exploit for two reasons. One, most cases it will autoplay or auto download the actual MMS message without user intervention. And the second factor being that all you need to know is to know the victim's phone number, which, as you can imagine, is relatively easy to get. Since media server is a privileged process, as you can see in the demo on the bottom right from a public source, you can do multiple things with the device, such as accessing, the victim's data. You can also, for example, get root access or shell access, to be more accurate, to the device and access their multiple files, as well as dump, their information as well. For example, to your own server that you maybe have connecting to if you're doing a remote attack. In terms of mitigations, Obviously, the short-term mitigations were to address the CVEs to close up those integer overflow exploits or vulnerabilities, as well as the other vulnerabilities related to the improper, bounds checking and whatnot. The more interesting mitigations to discuss here are the longer-term mitigations that Google started to lead because of the public exposure they got. In this particular slide, we'll talk about a couple of them. The first one is security maintenance releases. This, in a nutshell, is basically Google pushing all of its OEM vendors, handset manufacturers, as well as themselves, to try to release on a monthly basis patches for the known security vulnerabilities, right? And then to make these patches available to the users of these devices. The other more interesting one is the redesign of the Android media server architecture. As you can see in the bottom right, comparing Android M, which is Android 6.0, to Android N, which is 7.0, media server initially had a significant amount of privileges, so they obviously redesigned the whole media server architecture. They broke it down into multiple different components, each component that having the least privileges that it needs, as well as they had other interesting fixes here as well, such as detecting integer overflows and shutting down the process. They also try to reduce the case where autoplay will happen with messages, and of course secure best coding best practices. Then also from a platform perspective, Google obviously continue to do platform level enhancements. Verified boot is to try to ensure that the code has proper integrity that's running on the Android device. SE Linux is different policies again from the kernel, enforced by the kernel. Then you have different other things such as ASLR for address space layer randomization and kernel hardening, and again APK signature schemes. Final thoughts: security can be actually is extremely challenging. Hackers are always innovating, especially via reverse engineering. Their capabilities are significant. Open source has its advantages and disadvantages, so we have to look at both sides. However, being transparent and holding partners to account should never be a challenge. That should always be, an open, honest policy. And most importantly of all, always keep your devices updated. Do not be running older software. I hope this was beneficial, and we all hopefully can make sure our devices are updated to the latest software builds. Thank you very much.